What if the biggest enemy you've ever faced was living inside your own mind? What if the voice telling you to quit wasn't just a whisper, but a roar? And what if you learned to silence that voice, not with comfort, but with pain, grit, and relentless discipline? This is the world of David Goggins, a man who transformed himself from a broken, overweight exterminator into one of the toughest human beings alive. David Goggins didn't grow up a superhero. Far from it. He was abused by his father, bullied at school, and plagued with fear and insecurity. He grew up in a world that told him he wasn't enough, and for a long time, he believed it. He was overweight, directionless, and stuck. But at some point, something inside him snapped. Not in a reckless, destructive way, but in a way that lit a fire so deep it would never go out. That fire became Can't Hurt Me, a brutal, raw memoir about what it really takes to become unstoppable. At its core, Can't Hurt Me is a book about mental toughness, about callousing your mind the same way a laborer calluses their hands, about turning pain into fuel and excuses into action. Goggins argues that most people operate at only 40% of their true potential, and the remaining 60% is unlocked not through hacks or motivation, but through voluntary suffering and unshakable discipline. One of the first key ideas Goggins shares is what he calls the accountability mirror. Every night as a teenager, he would stand in front of his mirror and face the truth. Not sugar-coated, not polite, brutally honest. He'd write notes on the mirror with Post-its, calling himself out for being fat, lazy, or afraid. It wasn't about self-loathing, it was about refusing to lie to himself. He knew change wouldn't happen until he owned every part of his failure. So he stopped making excuses and started making demands. You can do this too. Try standing in front of the mirror tonight and asking, where am I lying to myself? It's uncomfortable, but clarity is the first step to growth. Another unforgettable story is Goggins' journey to becoming a Navy SEAL. He failed the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery test multiple times. He barely passed medical exams. He had to go through the infamous Hell Week not once, but 3 times. Imagine being pushed to your physical and mental breaking point over and over again, sleep-deprived, freezing, exhausted, and in constant pain. But he never quit. Not because he didn't want to, but because he had trained his mind to endure. He developed what he calls a calloused mind, a mind hardened by repetition, hardship, and discipline. That's the difference between most people and those who succeed. Most give up at the first sign of discomfort. But what if discomfort was the path? Goggins also introduces the cookie jar method. This isn't about actual cookies. It's about remembering your past victories. Every time you want to quit, dig into your mental cookie jar and pull out a memory of something you once thought was impossible, but you did it anyway. He used this method during a brutal 100-mile race he ran with no prior experience. Every time his body screamed to stop, he reached into that jar and reminded himself of who he'd become. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL to do this. Think of a time when you faced a challenge and made it through. That's your cookie. And every time you reach for it, you strengthen your identity as someone who doesn't quit. Then there's the 40% rule, probably one of the most famous ideas from the book. Goggins says that when your mind tells you you're done, you're really only at 40% of your capacity. The remaining 60% is locked behind fear, doubt, and comfort. Most people stop running, creating, growing, or leading not because they've maxed out, but because it hurts and they've never learned to push past that pain. Goggins argues that pain is the gateway to greatness. If you can learn to sit with it, to even seek it, you unlock a version of yourself that most never meet. The next time you feel like giving up, ask, what would happen if I went just a little further? Goggins also challenges the victim mindset. He's clear. He had every reason to play the victim. He was beaten, discriminated against, uneducated, and poor. But he realized that victimhood gave him nothing but more pain. So he made a conscious choice to stop feeling sorry for himself. He started seeing suffering not as punishment, but as a test. And every time he passed that test, he became stronger. That's why the title of the book is Can't Hurt Me. It's not that life won't hurt you. It's that no matter what it throws at you, it can't break you unless you let it. The beauty of Goggins' story is that it's not about talent, luck, or background. It's about the willingness to suffer voluntarily for a greater purpose. Whether it's running ultra marathons, breaking pull-up records, or waking up at 4 a.m. to train, Goggins chooses pain, not because he enjoys it, but because he knows that suffering is a crucible. It burns away weakness and forges resilience. And in a world obsessed with comfort, he reminds us that sometimes the only way forward is through. He's brutally honest about the emotional toll, too. There were times he cried, times he failed, times he questioned everything. But he kept going because his mission wasn't to be happy. It was to be unbreakable. That's a hard truth many self-help books avoid. Goggins doesn't promise ease. He promises transformation, but only if you're willing to go through the fire. What can we take away from all of this? First, radical self-honesty is the beginning of all change. No more sugarcoating. Second, pain is not the enemy. It's a compass pointing you toward growth. Third, you are capable of far more than you believe. But belief alone won't carry you. Action will. Repetition will. Suffering will. Can't Hurt Me is not just a memoir. It's a mirror. It reflects back the gap between who we are and who we could be. And it dares us to close that gap with sweat, discipline, and unwavering resolve. So ask yourself, what lies are you telling yourself? What pain are you avoiding? And what would happen if, just once, you chose to run toward the discomfort instead of away from it? Read the book, sit with the message, and maybe tonight before bed, you'll look in the mirror, not to admire, but to confront, not to judge, but to grow. That's where the real transformation begins. Because when you face your darkness, when you embrace the suck, and when you learn to say, "Can't hurt me," with conviction, not arrogance, you don't just change your life, you reclaim it. Now go earn your place in your own story. No one's coming to save you, but you're more than enough to save yourself.